American pride is in free fall. New Gallup polling finds a mere 58% of adults in the U.S. report being proud to be an American. This is a 9-point decline from 2024, marking a new record low and 5 points behind the recent low in 2020. It is worth noting the survey was conducted before the U.S. attack against Iran in late June.
It's not surprising that the divide over American pride splinters by party lines. Barely 1/3 of Democrats say they're extremely or very proud to be American, compared to a whopping 92% of Republicans and 53% of independents. Young Americans feel pretty grim too. According to Gallup, only 4 in 10 Gen Zers expressed a high level of pride in surveys spanning the past 5 years. This silent generation, that is, those born before 1946, consistently reported having the most pride, followed by baby boomers, Gen X, then millennials. The takeaway is that each generation seems to be less patriotic than prior generations.
Gallup started tracking this data since January of 2001. Pride among Americans of all stripes remained high in the aftermath of 9/11, but began to steadily trend downwards in the following years.
So I feel like this is one of our discussions that I often enjoy, where it's more discursive and it's not a particularly partisan topic. I mean, there does seem pretty clearly to be a decline in pride, or people who say they're extremely proud, certainly, to be American. What's your thesis as to why that is?
I think a huge part of it is the education system. History in particularly the K through 12 environment has been increasingly focused on America's wrongs as opposed to Americans' rights. I mean, even right now, my husband is finishing his college degree at University of Kentucky.
Congratulations to Mr. Joke.
Yes, and you know, sometimes he shares with me what he's learning in class, and he's taking an early American history class. And I was kind of stunned that the first 3 weeks of that class were entirely focused on slave trade and nothing about the American Revolution or the Articles of Confederation or the principles that founded the country. And they only got into those concepts when they were talking about the, of course, true and fair conflict between the cries for liberty while slave owning persisted in the United States. And I think it's obviously important for young people to learn about those concepts and to understand the wrongs in our history so that we can learn from it. But sometimes an outsized focus on it can lead to this depression of pride in our country and patriotism, and the idea that we do have founding principles that are really something to be very proud of. And I also think just generally, people have a hard time compartmentalizing the idea that you could be critical of policies that your country has or actions that they take while still overall retaining a sense of joy and pride in being a member of that country. And overall, the beautiful thing about America is that we are not perfect, but we're always striving to reach those values.
Mm-hmm. This is one of the things that makes these kind of discussions interesting, is that I think there's just it sort of exposes broader sort of philosophical differences, because the question of what is taught and what should be instilling pride in America and what detracts from pride in America, we could have a very long sort of granular conversation about that. But I just feel that if you look at even relatively recent American history, I consider some of the most patriotic figures in recent American history to be dissenters of one kind or another. I mean, Dr. King is the obvious example, right? But, I mean, people like Cesar Chavez or Dolores Huerta or Harvey Milk. I mean, these people, I think, are patriotic Americans fighting for, in Dr. King's case, obviously, more equitable treatment of black people, or more equitable treatment of farm workers, or more equitable treatment of gay people. And so those actions, those campaigns, those seem to me to be patriotic. And I don't think the flaws or shortfalls that those people pointed out about American society in their time should be seen as unpatriotic. I think the pointing out of those things is a patriotic action in itself.
I don't think the point that I'm making is that people who are fighting for a better future or advocating for the country to live up to its values are unpatriotic. My point is that an outsized focus sometimes on the places where America falls short can lead young people who aren't able to see the bigger picture to lose patriotism. And I think that's why we see this split between Democrats and Republicans, and the split between older Americans and Gen Z, which is that people who view these individuals fail to recognize that these individuals also had deep pride in their country, and they view the shortcomings as a reason to not be proud.
But you see, the linkage is, I think, that it is in part the teaching of past failures that paves the way or rationalizes the way to a better nation in the future. The whole reason that progress is made is because injustice becomes intolerable at a certain point. And I think that that is how the process works. And if you, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but certainly some people in the conservative sphere seem to me to want to create a kind of sanitized version of American history that greatly minimizes the wrongs that were done and therefore takes away from the impetus to right those wrongs.
Well, I think unfortunately in a lot of the curriculum that I see currently in the school system is that they don't get to that final part, which is this is creating a better way. And it turns into a defeatist attitude of, well, there's injustice now, so America can't possibly be great. And even just looking at the slavery issue again, I mean, the fact is that the American Revolution and those values of fighting for liberty, fighting for freedom, fighting against an unjust tyranny of the British Crown actually paved the way for emancipation, because not only did it, in the minds of a lot of Northern whites who had a very heavy religious background, see that there was this fundamental tension, but it also informed Black Americans who were in slavery that they were not being treated with the same rights or being fought for the same rights as the white individuals, the white subjects of the crown. So living up to those values was what created the conditions for people to recognize that slavery was an inherent wrong, that treating people as less than was inherently wrong, or treating them as not full persons. And I've just found that we don't get to that second part. It's always, well, people were subjugated, America's fundamentally racist, there's white supremacy, there's patriarchy, etc. Not America has founding values that make it a great country, even if there are cases of injustice. The beautiful thing is that we fight to get rid of those and make it better.
Now, it is not often that you say things on this show that remind me of Barack Obama, but that just happened there because the younger members of our audience might not be aware. Back in 2008, there was a whole big controversy. Jeremiah Wright was a former preacher of Barack Obama's who had very, very controversial views. And eventually, Obama came out and disclaimed him. And Obama's argument at that time, and I'm slightly misquoting him, but it was something to the effect that his former pastor was not wrong in diagnosing the things that had been wrong with American society at that prior time. Where he was wrong was in not admitting the potential for change, or that change has happened. So to that extent, I think that is obviously a valid argument. America, like any other nation, is not fixed constantly in one place. And if there are people arguing otherwise or curriculum teaching otherwise, I would share your misgivings about much of that. Perhaps a final point here is that I'm not entirely sure it is purely an educational issue driving these changes, because these numbers, the Gallup thing at the start of this century was 87% who were extremely or very proud. In 2016, it was still 81%. And then it fell 18 points in 4 years, which happened to be the 4 years coinciding with our current president's first term.
No, it's a good point, and I think that there is a huge political component as well, and that makes me sad because when Joe Biden was president, I didn't agree with much of what he did, but I still had great pride in being an American, and I don't think pride in your country should rest on who is holding political office. And I remember there was a New York Times editorial writer, Mara Gay, who described driving through Long Island and being fearful because she saw American flags on the back of pickup trucks. And that struck me as so perverse and so odd, having grown up in a country where every house had an American flag on the front of it. And the idea that that would scare you was so strange to me. and seems to be driven by this political division, to the point now where if you're driving around Old Town Alexandria and you see an American flag on the house, it's a rare sight. And it's probably next to 3 houses that have a pride flag and a Ukraine flag and maybe a Palestinian flag. And it's almost like you can tell the political leanings of people based on whether or not they have an American flag on their house.
Yeah.
That to me is a real shame.
Yeah, I agree that it is a shame. I think that it is partly just a consequence of the fact that so many people, roughly half the country, sees Trump as an aberrational president, not merely one of the other party. And so they look at his actions on a whole number of things that you and I have talked about before, and they see those things not only as conservative or right of centre or whatever term we might apply, but antithetical to the values of the United States. And I think that is one of the reasons why his presidency appears to have coincided with some of this fall off. It is because people, I think, may feel themselves less inclined to wrap themselves in the flag when he so often presents himself as a sort of the embodiment of the country.
You mentioned Obama earlier. I will say, despite my political disagreements with the man, he had one quote that I quite liked, which was that the arc of history tends to bend towards justice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Good one.
Absolutely.
All right, we have a lot more topics to talk about on Rising right after this.